Hello, I'm Amy and I coordinate the Ableton user group here in Central Victoria in Australia. We meet up most months with a special guest who takes us through some aspect of their music making using Ableton Live. And in our May 2021 meetup, we were joined by an incredible electronic music powerhouse. Her name is Louise Terra. She's a songwriter who produces really idiosyncratic music that kind of straddles dream pop and electronica. And she has a long-standing love of vocals, which you'll hear in her session today. And she has an incredible background that spans theatre as well as many things, and her live performances, if you get lucky enough to catch them, are wonderfully innovative and entertaining, kind of installation works almost. She also happens to be a lecturer in the Bachelor of Songwriting at NMIT, and that's just the tip of the iceberg with this woman. She's an all-round incredible creative human. In this session, Louise takes us through a recent work in progress, a bit of a draft, but it's a very well-developed draft, and she gives us some really accessible guidance on how she creates her rich sound worlds and some really fantastic motivation and methods for just diving in and making stuff. Regardless of the outcomes or what you want to make of it. It's a wonderful session. I think you'll get a lot out of it, and you'll certainly be motivated to move on and make music as soon as she's finished her session. So enjoy.
What I thought to do tonight was to play a track and sort of unpack where it's at, which is a demo. So it's when I say demo, it means it's somewhere between, it's getting close to being a finished track, and but it's still a little bit away from being mixed. There's still a little bit of work that I want to do on the track itself. But it's kind of, the shape of the song is really there, and I think a lot of the ideas for the song has been, I've explored them. So now it's like I'm into sort of sound design part of the process, and yeah, really shaping some of the kind of sonic elements in it. So I thought that would be an interesting place to sort of bring you into my process, something that's not like super finished. And I thought I would use this track because it is something that when I was in lockdown last year, I set myself what I like to call the hour of power, where I would, at the end of my working day, if I had the energy, and I would try to just like muster the energy, I'd be like, it's only an hour. And I would set myself this constraint of songwriting in this 1 hour. And I called it the hour of power because I was allowing myself to stop after that hour. And what my main objective was in that time was to get as much of a song idea out. It wasn't music production. It wasn't sound design. That sort of stuff I would do separately. And I'm happy to answer questions about any of that if that doesn't make sense to y'all. But it was really about coming up with song ideas, coming up with some song sections, and trying to hash out a song in that time. And then I could come back to it later and sort of really spend more time exploring the song if I felt like there was something that came out in that hour. And that was the other thing, was that it wasn't about necessarily making a song that I was just so in love with each time. It was an exercise to just generate material. So there's heaps of misses in my hour of power times and some hits. So this was one of the ones where I was like, this is just, yeah, it's got a life. I'm hearing it in my head afterwards. It's staying with me. I have to work on it. So that's sort of how I approached this one. And each time I did an hour of power, I would choose a different starting point or a different set of constraints. I'd be like, okay, this time I'm mostly a vocalist. So this time I'm going to use my voice. I'm going to start with my voice and I'm going to use my synth. I have a Roland System 1 over here. that I use, and sometimes I've got the Moog Sub Fatty as well, which I'm borrowing and I get to use as well. So that might be my constraint. For this song, I was like, I'm just going to use Ableton. I'm just going to use the sounds in Ableton, and I'm going to use my voice. So, there's an amazing effect going on. Maybe it's Ben, it might be on your side. Maybe it's better if you mute yourself. Excellent. And if you need to ask a question and I'm not seeing, feel free to unmute yourself and get my attention through your audio. So I have got this song. I thought maybe it'd be good for us to just listen to the song, and then we can look at the sort of, like, we can go underneath the hood and check out some of the mechanics of it. Amy suggested that I share a link with you, just in case some of your audio, there might be some variations in your audio. It's about a 4-minute song. So I've got a link to a SoundCloud version of this song. So if you can all just take like the next 5 minutes and have a listen to it, I think that's probably the best thing to do. I'll listen to it here as well, so I know that we're roughly in the same time. I'll just stop my video. Is this a good process, Amy? Excellent. All right, let's go. Oh, great. You got to hear it. Nice. Thank you.
I love that breakdown at like 142 or something, where it just a different synth just came in and it was just dropped, and yeah, it was mad, and then just picked up. It was good.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thank you. Great. Yeah, I love the breakdown sections as well. Does anyone like just immediately have any questions before I kind of like show you the back end a little?
I'm pretty sure you'll go over it, but I'm interested to see how you get your definition between your vocal lines, because there's a lot happening vocally. And so you've got this beautiful, there's the two kind of lead ones that are interweaving and they feel really present. And then there's all of this ethereal stuff and there's delayed stuff. And yeah, I just love to unpack that. That's gorgeous.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's like the more I've worked on it, the more that the vocal elements have become really they've really been a part of the kind of, not just the song and the lyrical kind of stuff, like also the atmosphere in there. So I just want to just test something. We're all getting sound coming through from my, excellent, nice. So yeah, this is the sort of layout of the piece. Like, I don't even know how many tracks there are. There is, these are all my synths. So I've got a main synth line. I've kind of got what I've called a flute warble. And then I've got a string voice, which is a one. These are all presets in Ableton. And you can kind of see, like, across the duration of the track, like, they're not really coming in until, somewhere in around like the 40-second mark. The sub bass is really integral to it. Oh, and I've got these saw bass lines, which they almost sound like guitar-y, kind of those distorted synth parts, which probably were the first sounds when I was mucking around in my hour of power, that I was like, ooh, I really like this saw bass sound. And it's called Whisper Advantage. It's a preset in Ableton. So I've really, that provided a lot of kind of atmospheric inspiration. Then I've got all the drums and I've broken them all down into their individual hits, so that I've got the opportunity to really create space around them, and position them sort of in the mix, treat them all a little differently. And then we get into the vocals. And this is really where it does get quite chunky. So in the lead vocals, I've got, and these vocals are total demo takes. Like, you would have heard there was imperfections in there. There was imperfections in the actual, there was some grit in there, that these are just, I've really worked them, but they're just my guide vocals. And basically what I do is I get the track just super duper polished, and then I'll go in and I'll do those final vocals. So I've got my lead vocal track, and I've got also a harmony line that I've made. So I've got that mid harmony, and then I've also got a octave lower. So that's in my lead. That's in my lead vocal part. And I've done all of that in Ableton, I'm almost certain. I've used Little Altar Boy, so you don't have to use Little Altar Boy. I just treated myself last in lockdown, and I bought a set of plugins which I've really admired for a long time. And please do not get me wrong, this is the first set of plugins that I've ever actually bought myself. I have just used everything in Ableton, got a few cracks of plugins here and there, but found myself like mostly just using Ableton plugins. And then I got to use these Sound Toy plugins, and I was just like, I want to go a little bit further with some effects. But Amy tells me that Ableton 11 is super sweet in terms of the built-in audio effects, and I swear by Ableton's built-in audio effects, but Little Altar Boy is just one of the Sound Toys effects that it's basically for pitch shifting vocals, but you can go into your clip and you can transpose in the envelope section of your clip. You can transpose an octave really easily there. I don't know if any of you have ever done that, but that is just, it sounds great. And you would just like set up your warp controls. I think that affects how the sort of transposition sounds. Is that right, Amy? Or am I just making that up?
You're not making it up. It's yeah, so you'll use those warp modes for different types of sounds, and how it's then played back. It's how it divides the sound up. Ben will probably be able to jump in and be a bit more technical on that. But it's just basically if you've got often, so for a textured sound, you would choose something like, or if you were singing more kind of using your voice texturally, you choose complex or something, or texture. You play around with them. Obviously, beats are better for beats, and tones are for, you know, your simple keyboard lines and that kind of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, that is it's a really powerful way to just sort of like create a bit of meat to a lead vocal line. This is the one take that I have duplicated on these different tracks here and created harmonies through effects, and or you could just do the same thing through transposing. So that is what's going on in the sort of lead vocal part. And I really like to group things and also like color them as well, if you haven't noticed, because my brain gets really like visually overwhelmed by so many tracks. So this is one way that I keep myself sane, is I color things and I group things. So I've also got what I've called here is like a vocal bed. And this is really just, this is actually a lot of harmonic textural bedding that the song sits within. This is actually the starting point vocally for me, were these takes. So it's all, and these are improvised. So it's always really good to keep those bits until you've got to a certain point of your composition and you're like, okay, I'm not going to use them again. But these were kind of just guiding kind of sounds that I was making when I was coming up with the song. This is well before I wrote the lead vocal line. And as you can see, I've gone through and I've sculpted bits out. So these were pretty chunky kind of takes. Some of them I've actually looped as well over here, so that they're repeating exactly where I want them to. But something that I do and so yeah, you can see I've named them as well. I've got like high 3 BB, high 2 BB, high 1 BB, mid high BB, mid to low BB. just so that if I'm like, there is something going wrong in my textural vocal bedding, and I can hear that it's in the sort of lower range, I can go to my mid to lows and I can start straight away there when I'm problem solving. I find that like there is a lot of creative troubleshooting that is a part of using software like Ableton to create music. And so this is one of the kind of like simple ways that I have realized that this kind of troubleshooting, how to like simplify that process is actually naming your tracks really well. And then as your ear gets better at hearing what's going on and what isn't working, you can just go straight to it rather than be like, oh my goodness, where buried in these 42 tracks is the problem. So the vocal bed, yeah, as you can see, what I've done is just one question before I go on. Is this screen too small for people? Because I can make it look bigger in Ableton. I can change the perspective if it's bothering anyone. Just let me know. Oh, great. You got little altar boy too, Amy. Yes. Little lockdown treats just to keep ourselves sane. Yeah, I like to deactivate clips. So instead of deleting audio information from some of these takes that I might come back and use, I deactivate them. And I like to use quite a few shortcuts in Ableton. So you could right click and you could choose activate clip here because it's deactivated right now. Or you could just hit 0. It's so good. And you can also, so if I activate clip and then I wanted to deactivate it, you also hit 0. So it's this really quick way to just do a bit of sculpting of your layers and play with the texture. And by texture, I'm talking about density. It's like thickness of sound, thinness of sound. So you can see that there's the vocal bed gets quite a bit thicker as the song goes on. So there's the vocal bed. Then I did some fun processing. Now, this is just where I was like, okay, the song just needs some atmospheric elements. It needs some more texture, some more like weird, idiosyncratic kind of layers. And that's always, I think, something that, this is why I love electronic music, because you can just muck around and go in with a very playful attitude and just keep mucking around until you find something you're like, I don't even need to justify that, but I just really like it. It's doing something really cool for me. And I think I'm always looking for something just a little bit weird and unusual in music. And especially in electronic music, because, you know, it's so blocky and we kind of we're working in these kinds of grid forms. I feel like it's a really important thing to inject something just a little bit a little bit your flavor. And so this is where I had a bit of fun just processing some vocals. So what's going on here is I've actually recorded. This is kind of complicated for me to unpack because I don't even think I was very conscious of what I was doing in this phase. So this is good for you to ask me this because I'm like, what did I actually do here? So you can see here I've changed like where I'm getting my audio from. And that's really how I rolled in working with this vocal resampling. So what I've got here is this vocal resample line, which is also what I've ended up, like I've just fed things in on themselves. So there's not a great deal of logic here because I was really playing, but it started with this vocal resample line and I took in my input, instead of like a microphone, I took I took a track from the, composition and I sent that through. Like you could do this in you could send something to a returns track in a similar way, but I find this a little bit more of a fun way of working with audio and then you can kind of record whatever you've resampled or like reamped or processed in the track itself. So I've taken the vocal bed, that group of vocal beds, and I've sent that through my vocal resampler. And in that, I have a little primal tap. I've created a lot of weird rhythmic information. So these effects are all they're all rhythmic effects. So little primal tap is a something that comes with that Sound Toys program. And then I've used the beat repeat in Ableton. Now, beat repeat is powerful. Like, you know, I always use beat repeat and I go way too hard and then I dial it back generally, because it's so fun. It can get really, really stupid really quickly. Then I've got a delay, which is also creating a kind of a rhythmic information to this resample. And then I've put a tremolo on it as well. So I've just gone gangbusters with creating kind of strange rhythmic relationships. And the way that I've worked in this space is like I said, very intuitive, very much about fun and play, and getting something that I think sounds very evocative and strange. And it's playing with the information in the song already. So putting it in context. I mean, sure, it sounds all right without it, but for me, I'm just like, that's the kind of sonic information that I just get excited about in the music. What I've also done outside of like processed vocals, so I've recorded the vocal resample as well. I've actually like recorded some of the audio, so it's just baked. It's just printed. So because there's some variation, especially in and I'm pretty sure that Vocal Fun, you will find that in your presets for audio, for beat repeat, you just do in here and you got Vocal Fun. So I love the presets in Ableton. It is just so intuitive. You can just be like, well, what am I working with? You know, and you could be like, yeah, I'm creating something, you know, in this particular style. So maybe air push is going to be fun to muck around with. And you can do that in all of these. Auto pan's another really great way to kind of move sounds around. You've got all these great, really intense effects that are already made for you. And you can dial them back from there. You can work with those presets and make them your own. So, yeah, I have also pressed some of, you know, I don't know what you call it, Amy, or like other folk in the room, but I call it like, I just am like, yeah, I baked that track, or I pressed that track, I printed it. And then it's there as like a hard audio data, rather than all of these relationships that might have some kind of variability in them. I've printed them to audio. What I ended up also doing is adding these vocal loops just to create more. I'm really, it's a new thing for me to be exploring more vocal layering in my work. Now, what I've done there is I've done this transposition, what I was talking to you about earlier. I think that transposition is so much fun to play with. And again, transposition, these kinds of getting into your envelope controls in the clip view and getting to automate some of those as I've done here and set these like modulation controls here. Really allows you to create a lot of texture and nuance and movement in your tracks. Another problem I think that, you know, a lot of electronic musicians fall into is, you know, you've got your things in your blocks and you're in your grid and everything's repeating, and it just starts to get really predictable and very blocky, and it starts to sound like a machine. And for me, that's something I'm always trying to avoid is I don't want people to hear. I don't want them to think about the process of that, you know, of what I've used to make it when they're having their first listen. I want them to just get deeply immersed. I want them to feel transported. I want them to go into a kind of a textural, visceral, otherworldly space. And then maybe later, like they can come back and be like, well, what was going on there? Rather than being like, yeah, I can hear that drum machine. There's that snare. It's the same snare every single time. You know, and that for me is like, that's what I'm trying to avoid in my, and this is where simple things like transposing this is like one loop. I've also, you can see here, like this is an actual loop with in and out points, and you can see the rest of the audio material here. So it's this tiny little sliver of the audio that I'm using. But what I've done over here is I've actually I printed that so that I could play with this transposition. So the way that you do that is you just right click and you consolidate. And that turns that looping section, which is trickier to get into the clips and start to play with the modulation and create these automated points. Because I was dealing with like a quarter note loop, like really quick loops there. So it doesn't give me much opportunity to play. But then if I consolidate, then I've got this as a whole chunk of audio. And then I get to go into here and muck around with how that transposition works over time, for example. So that is what's going on with the vocals. And yeah, I feel like that's really like the major sonic material of most of my work, though as I said, I'm getting more into this kind of processing and creating textural atmospheres with my voice. But as a singer, that's really like super duper important to how I approach my songwriting. Any particular questions coming up for anybody at this point? Hi, Ben.
Hi, Louise. Thanks for such a great, clear explanation. Do you think that has that hour of power really helped you in this really creative process? Because you keep referring back to it, it sounds like it's a very instrumental in helping you free up that creativity.
It is so instrumental. I think that sometimes when you're working in such a powerful instrument like Ableton, the trickiest thing is working out how to start, because it's the unlimited potential. That can actually be the antithesis of creativity. And I think that it's often maybe a misunderstanding about constraints, because as creative folk, we're like, well, no one's going to box me in. And so we lose something, a fundamental understanding of the need for rules, the need for constraints, and actually how creativity really flourishes in that space. So the Hour of Power, I've only started doing it in this last year, and it has given me it's process. It's given me a really clear process for how I can approach songwriting day after day after day. And it never has to be, it doesn't get stale, because I set the constraints each time. And another rule of the Hour of Power is, if you get stuck on something, if you sort of like fiddling around with one thing, stop, move on. That's not the time for the fiddling around and the fine tuning. It's really just a creative free for all. So I thought maybe actually on that note, Ben, it might be good for me to show you how the background of this in arrangement view actually started in session view. And this was where I started the Hour of Power. And when I'm working in Ableton as my starting point, I will often start in session view. I don't always start in session view. I don't always start with Ableton. Sometimes I won't use really any inbuilt sounds in Ableton, but starting in session view allows me to really quickly lay down some section ideas. And you can see that I've actually like labeled them. It's like intro, verse, chorus. One is probably like break, like that break that you spoke of, that you picked up in there, Wayne. Verse, chorus, outro. So I basically, in that Hour of Power, I would have done the bare bones of the sections. I might not have labeled them then. I might not have had that opportunity in that hour, but as you probably all know, I'm figuring most of you have written songs. Some songs just fall out really quickly and others take longer. So sometimes I do get to the point where I'm like, that would definitely be the bridge, and that would be the verse, and that would be the chorus, and isn't that cool? So you can hear the prototype of this track in here. The saw bass, like I said, was a really fundamental aspect of it. It was really this basic, and that basic drum beat that you hear in there, which isn't even really like drums. It's like a clave and a tom, or I think it's actually a bongo sound. I would have made that so that I didn't have to listen to the goddamn metronome. So that's another really great trick for not driving yourself insane when you're trying to be creative. I hate the sound of the metronome. I don't mind that it's doing the beat. I really like that. But the tick tock, if you're doing like vocals in your ears on your headphones, yeah, I just make a really basic metronome. So in there, I've got claves and yeah, this little hand percussion sound and the bongos. So yeah, I would have just come in and made, it's just like a bar. It's really basic. So this is before this is just me mucking around with the textures. And then I would have just repeated it. So working in sample view, I say sample view because it's kind of like a sampler, right? Session view allows me to work really quickly because I can just do like however many bars of a loop that I want to set up. So I don't have to, and I often like to write like bass lines. I like to write maybe a longer little like progression so that there's a little bit of variation in there. But yeah, I've just got like basic looping kind of shapes, and they're just rolling around, and that's how I get the ideas out. And then I would just like hit record up here, and then I would record, and it's recording in arrangement view. And that's how I would have mapped out the whole song. So I don't want to actually do that though, because I've worked pretty hard on this. And then I go into arrangement view And that's when I really do the hard work. That's the work. Getting the ideas out, getting a song out, like I think we can all do that. The work is like committing to that song and shaping that song and digging deeper and knowing when you're like, I'm not satisfied, I have to keep working and doing that work. And I think that in that line, on that topic of like our inner critic, there is a really essential role that your inner critic plays. So it's about really, I think there's something really important about catching yourself when you're just like, everything's shit. I'm shit at this. I'll never be good at this. I'm actually just don't have what it takes. That is not the helpful inner critic. And we all do that to ourselves. We talk ourselves out of what we love doing, and we tell ourselves that we are imposters. We're never going to be good at this. So, it's fucked. We're fucked. So that's not helpful. But I think that there's something really important about listening to our gut when we're like, I don't like that sound. That's important. And all it's really saying to you is like, there is the work. Right there where you don't like that sound, that you're not comfortable with it, it's not sitting with you. That's the work, and that's the only work that you have to do. So yeah, I think it's really important to talk about the inner critic. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of me in a nutshell. Anything that anyone feels like asking?
No, I'm just soaking it up, really. So yeah, there's I like some of the techniques you've been using, like just using your, like, it's not sub channels, but you're basically routing your audio so that you can then group a section of stuff and apply filters and stuff to
Yeah.
it. That's really great. Yeah, and just the way you're thinking about all the whole process, not just about the the vocals, or you're thinking about the whole song, and you just develop it over time and you add to it, and you experiment, you play around, and you end up coming out with a product, which is it's good.
And yeah, I would always work with a mixing engineer. I definitely do mix my work as I'm going so that I can tolerate it. And so I'll do things like, I'll add EQ to things. I'll try to, I'll pan things quite a bit. So I'll bring a fair bit of space into the mix. You can see here, I've kind of got a logic to how I will EQ things. So, if I've got a multiple set of like synth parts, it's not probably, I haven't actually like really highlighted that super well here, but like I might bring out a certain frequency in one part and then go into another part and just slightly bring that down so that I'm creating space for all of those parts in the frequency spectrum. And I also do a fair bit of panning. So I'll decide like what things stay in the middle and what things I send off into certain, into various aspects of the stereo field. Always with the bass, always with the kick, always with the lead vocals. I leave them dead on in the center. There's no rules, but these are some fundamental kind of backbones to songs, especially like if you're writing like, contemporary music or something that you want to sort of be maybe like in pop sort of music form. Like these are kinds of backbones you don't want to get off the center. But when I'm in the drums, like you'll see I've got my kicks all going, all staying center on. I've got a few kicks. So again, in that mode of electronic music getting real blocky, it's something that took me a really long time to work out of like, I think I need more in the sonic palette, especially when it comes to beats, so that there's a dynamic shift in the sound between the verses and the choruses, and I'll use a different kick in those sections. And also I've got a snare, these snare parts that are playing 2 different snares. That's another really important part of nuance. So, but you can see that I've also panned one to the left, sorry, to the right by 9 fangs. And I actually, the rule is that I always, if I pan one thing one way, a certain amount, I have to pan something else another way, a certain amount. So that's my set of rules about panning. And I do a lot of panning because it just, you put, basically what you're doing is putting those sounds in their own space. So I try to not have things always panned in the same, to the same degree. So then I've got other percussive sounds. I've got these 2, 12 to the left, 12 to the right. That idea, you know, 6 to the left, 6 to the right. This idea of like whatever I pan one way, I got to also pan something else the other way. So especially with beats and stuff, if you want to create like a bit of a sense of things not being super blocky again in that electronic space, like things having a little bit of like feel and movement and space things. And I do the same with my vocals. The vocals, all of those vocal parts that we were looking at. The lead, I don't. Like I said, I keep the lead dead on. Everything else, I'm panning all over the place, however I feel. It's really just a matter of listening, using your ears and being like, I like that. I'm going to do it like that. But I really think that one of the best rules I ever learned about panning is whatever you pan one way, you need to find something else to pan in another, in the other direction, so that you don't come out with a mix where you've got all this sonic information on the left and not enough on the right. And you'll see it in your printed mixes. You'll be like, that waveform, that's just looking pretty out of balance.
And just had a question in the chat, Louise.
Oh, beaut. Do you sequence your drums all together, then separate the different elements, or sequence the elements separately? I do the former, Ben. I do a really basic rudimentary sequence of drums. I do sometimes do the kick separately, just for because I like, when I'm sort of creating my track, I like the kick to sound pretty punchy and I like to compress it. So I'll generally separate the kick, but then everything else I'll write in the one sequence, and then I absolutely go in and I cut them back to just that one part. It's slightly time consuming, but that's the stuff you don't do in the hour of power. That's the stuff you do when you're doing the work. So I've used the C78 core kit and the Cashin kit. So these are Ableton kits. I'm not like setting up sample libraries and bringing them in, and I certainly don't think that, you know, this is like the best way to make drums either, but it's completely fine for the kind of music that I'm making. And I get in there and I muck around with the sounds and I get them sounding how I want, and I add delay or certain kinds of EQs or compression to get things sounding the way I want. And what I generally will then do is I'll like duplicate each layer, and then I'll go in and I'll like pare everything back, and I will delete all of the other parts as well as all of the other, I try to do that. Like, for example, delete all of those MIDI notes as well, just so that it's really like, again, visually, I'm just seeing like those hits. If I really wanted to kind of like zoom in and look at my progression, I can just see what those, how those rhythms are structured together. And just for like my processing of my computer, I just go in and delete every, like, you know, rather than having the whole cache and kit for one sound, I'll just delete everything. I'll solo that one so it's really clear that that's the one I'm dealing with, and I'll delete everything else around it.
I'm just wondering with your with the Hour of Power, which I think is fabulous way of just kind of purging it, like creative energy out of you and into something. How are you finding how much of that is turning into finished work for you?
Look, it's not all. What would the percentage be? Let me think. I would say, like, of every 10, I could have like 5 that I might be like, I could keep working on something from this. Maybe like 3 to 5. And look, there's some sort of schools of thought out there with the Hour of Power as another way of approaching it, which is that you don't save anything. It's not actually about, it's just a chance for you to exercise the muscle, keep songwriting. So there has been times where I'm just like, I'm not going to save this. I already know that this is like some kind of vomit space that I don't want to go back into. It's just, and like you said, it really is a purge. And so sometimes I'm getting out, like sometimes it's a struggle and I'm hating it, and everything that's coming out feels like derivative or dull, or like, you know, just like everything, like just like the thing I did yesterday, like it's not kind of gelling. And so, you know, I might save it, go back and listen to it and delete it later, or delete it then and there. So, you know, if you could kind of shape it how you wanted, and if you really wanted to treat it more like a space where you're not precious about things, you're not holding on to it, I think that's also it's still a really useful exercise, and it helps you to sort of maybe sort of stop expecting yourself to always sit down at the computer and make something genius. I just think that's bullshit. I think that doesn't happen every time.
Yeah, and I think it's dangerous to get in that mindset of expecting it to happen, because then it's a slippery slope to to really not liking your music at all, or your ability, like you were saying earlier. I think it's I've also seen versions of this idea where you kind of treat it as a challenge for, I'm going to do this every night and I'm just going to pick one sound, and it doesn't matter what, like whatever is the first sound that you happen to find, whatever instrument it is in, and then you have to just make something out of it. Set your alarm, 10 minutes later, press save, put it in a folder, do not listen back to it, do not look at it, and then do that for a whole stretch of, you know, a week or a couple of weeks, and then go back and listen to it, so that your mind is purely in that, just putting it out, that whole creative sense, and not even stepping back to do any kind of design on it, or even just any editing, or even thinking about what it might be. It's just pure like creativity, which I think is also maybe something worth sharing as well.
Absolutely.
To do. And I'm wondering, is this something that are you going to continue to play around with your own parameters and boundaries on how you might set this up? Like, will you, because I mean, I think, if I'm assuming people are like me, that you have your own natural impulses of how you start things. You tend to start with I always go for a bass line. Like, I love bass. Like, that's just, I often start with a bass line and then I build up things, or I have a vocal melody, so I build up under it, or whatever it is. But is there ways that you might challenge yourself to start with something that you're potentially you never start with, like drums or something like that?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that that's definitely a part of that. It's like setting of constraints and setting of rules is what, like a really great tip for that is to choose the thing you feel least confident in from time to time as well. So yeah, for me, starting with a beat is definitely my you know, my handicap. It's not something that I feel I'm really fantastic in. And it can sometimes frustrate me and get me all like in that space, that critique, that inner critic of like, you're not good at this, electronic music, you can't make good beats, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, definitely starting with beats has been something I've done in this. Sometimes it's also like, if you've got an electric guitar sitting around like me that you haven't played for years, like myself, and you go, I'm going to fucking start with the electric guitar, like do the thing that you're just like, you really need to do, and give that I think giving those kinds of constraints to yourself is really great. And the things that you need to work are definitely really good starting points if you're not strong at bass lines, which I personally feel like I've really had to work on bass lines, starting right there. But yeah, as well as being like, well, I've got a new toy, or I've got this process idea that I've been thinking about, or I heard someone talk about. Don't overload the agenda, don't overload your rules. Peter it out across different sessions. Maybe just like 2 rules is enough to set up a session like that. And then if you've got more rules, use them the next day or when you get to do the exercise again, and just keep chipping away at exploring those constraints that are A, of interest to you, and B, are going to challenge you to work differently. If you never start with voice, do it. You could make a whole track with your voice if you have never. It's a really great way to connect with your inner musical ear, which we all have, and to try to get it out of yourself, to articulate it out of yourself, even if you go back in later and you use completely different sounds for those parts. Just getting yourself better at like hearing the sounds that you're trying to communicate, the vocalizing those is a really great start.
And not pressing stop when you press, like, just don't press stop the first time you go, oh, that was crap. Oh, I sang out of tune. Who cares? Keep going.
Who cares?
Because that next thing that you're going to sing is probably the thing that you could hook a whole song to. And we all do that. Like when you're doing a take, it's just that too quick to press stop.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. Did anyone else have any questions before we give Louise a break? It's been amazing. Everyone good? No, I think everyone's got heaps to take away.
Nice.
Louise, thank you so much. That was really beautiful. That was really an incredible. I love how clear your instructions and your explanations for things were, and accessible, which I think is so important using Ableton, particularly when you're first starting. It's just, I think you can get overwhelmed if you start going down the YouTube video route. Some of it, you can get the sound bro vibe where it's just like you feel like you're supposed to know everything, where you've framed it that it's so much of it is intuitive, and using the presets is actually and there's nothing wrong with using presets and changing nothing about them, and just creating a track like that. There's so much attitude about it, but it's just like,
if anyone ever tells you that how you can't make a song using presets in Ableton, just don't even have the conversation with them, but in your own mind just know that they are wrong. They are so wrong.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Judge them. Right? No, but it's just that it is intuitive, and that there is no set one set of rules or one route in Ableton. That's the beautiful thing about it, is that, yeah, you can go whatever way you want, and experimentation is such a beautiful way to get there. You can watch a million tutorials on the same process, and everybody will have some slight tweak on how they do it. So you find yours, and I love that you've built so much of that into your process, and it makes it your own sound. Ultimately, it's your own organic, beautiful sound. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's gorgeous.
Thanks so much for having me, Amy. And yeah, it's been great to have you all in the room, and thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.